This is a public-facing briefing that will be live streamed on the committee's YouTube channel. Note that we invited our minority colleagues to the briefing, but they have declined to participate. Nevertheless, the committee is open to all committee members, and we continue to invite all of our colleagues to participate. Now, this is not technically an official committee activity, so there's no official record of the event, but any member who wishes to share any relevant statement, article, letter, or other item may do so by way of their personal office's communications methods. Members must keep their microphones muted unless they are speaking, at which time you'll need to turn your video cameras and microphones on. For any member using a telephone on audio only, dial *6 to unmute and remute your phones. If anyone is experiencing difficulties during the briefing, please contact the committee's IT director or chief clerk by email or phone. That information should have been sent with the notice of the meeting. Clerk will now call the roll. Jaria?
Chairman Scott?
Present.
Mrs. Davis?
Present.
Mr. Grijalva? Mr. Courtney? Ms. Fudge? Mr. Sablon? Ms. Wilson? Ms. Bonamici? Mr. Takano? Ms. Adams? Mr. DeSaulnier? Mr. Norcross? Ms. Jayapal? Mr. Morelli? Ms. Wild?
Present.
Mr. Harder? Mrs. McBath? Ms. Schreier?
Present.
Ms. Underwood? Mrs. Hayes? Ms. Shalala?
Present.
Mr. Levin? Ms. Omar?
Present.
Mr. Trone? Ms. Stevens? Mrs. Lee? Mrs. Trahan? Mr. Castro? Mrs. Fox? Mr. Rowe? Mr. Thompson? Mr. Wahlberg? Mr. Guthrie? Mr. Byrne? Mr. Grothman? Ms. Stefanik? Mr. Allen? Mr. Smucker? Mr. Banks? Mr. Walker? Mr. Comer? Mr. Klein? Mr. Fulcher? Mr. Wright? Mr. Muser? Mr. Johnson? Mr. Keller? Mr. Murphy? Mr. Van Drew? Chairman Scott, this concludes the roll call.
Thank you. Did Allison Smith want to be recognized?
Oh, this is Suzanne Bonamici. I'm sorry, my staff. So thank you, Mr. Chairman.
You know how to rename yourself?
I do, yes.
Um,
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Anyone else want to be
Suzanne
recognized?
Bonamici is present.
Thank you. Okay. The members will be recognized, as I indicated, for in the order in which they seek recognition, not seniority. So please indicate if you have a question in the chat box. For those using a telephone and audio only, please have your staff indicate your interest in the chat box on your behalf. Today's briefing will last an hour, so members should ask their questions succinctly and be considerate of other members wanting to ask questions. A chime will sound as a reminder when your time has expired, and you'll notice the in one of the boxes we have 001 timer, which gives the time. I now recognize myself for opening comments. The COVID-19 pandemic has triggered several parallel crises for communities and industries across the country, but few are as urgent as the current child hunger crisis. As many as 17 million children went hungry this summer. Food insecurity has concentrated among Black and Latino households who report food insecurity at rates twice that of white households in the early weeks of the pandemic. This disturbing spike in child hunger has occurred despite the significant steps Congress took at the onset of the pandemic to provide more assistance to struggling families. In March, Congress passed the Families First Coronavirus Response Act. This bipartisan relief package created a pandemic EBT program, the PEBT, to provide benefits to children who would otherwise receive free or reduced school meals, but can't, of course, because the schools are closed. The package also gave the U.S. Department of Agriculture the flexibility to allow schools and community parents to deliver, and community partners to deliver meals, offer free meals to all students through the summer food service program, and address other barriers to getting meals in the hands of students and families. Last night, Democrats successfully negotiated to preserve these key child nutrition provisions in the continuing resolution. The compromise struck last night will extend and expand the pandemic EBT program, which prevented at least 2.7 million children from going hungry in its first week alone. There's also, it will also extend Department of Agriculture's authority to continue offering schools greater flexibility throughout the school year, not just through the end of the calendar year. Even with these provisions, there's no question that we must secure additional federal funding for all child nutrition programs, as most schools will begin the year in hybrid or fully remote instructions. And we have to note that the continuing resolutions pass the House. We assume it's going to pass the Senate, but they have to take that action. The HEROES Act, which passed the House more than 4 months ago, makes the long-term investments in proven child nutrition strategies, including urgent emergency relief for school meal programs that of course we need. Unfortunately, Senate Republican proposals that have included other proposals have not included a single cent to address child food insecurity during the pandemic, while still including the 3 martini lunch deduction that lets corporate executives charge taxpayers for expensive business meals. Instead of ignoring child hunger crisis and hope it disappears, Congress and the administration must provide struggling families the urgent relief they need throughout the pandemic. Today, we're joined by 2 esteemed experts who will help us examine the challenges that our schools face and discuss the need to enact the HEROES Act. I'm pleased to first introduce Luis Guardia, who serves as president of the Food Research and Action Center. And now I'll yield to the gentlelady from Minnesota, Ms. Omar, to introduce our other witness. You're muted. Okay.
Thank you, Chairman. It's my pleasure to introduce Ms. Angela Ritchie, who is the Nutrition Services Director at Roseville area, St. Anthony, New Britain schools in Ramsey and Hennepin counties in Minnesota, serving just under 100,000 students in 18 schools. She's a registered dietitian and member of the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics and the School Nutrition Association. Welcome, Ms. Ritchie and Mr. Guardia.
Thank you, Congressman Omar, and I want to thank our experts for joining us. And we'll now start testimony from Mr. Guardia.
Terrific. Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman, for the opportunity to speak with you today. I am Luis Guardia, the president of the Food Research and Action Center, FRAC. We are the leading national anti-hunger organization working to eradicate poverty-related and racially inequitable hunger in the United States. On behalf of the tireless thousands of anti-hunger workers across the U.S., we're very thankful for the committee's leadership and commitment to child nutrition and WIC programs during COVID and in normal times as well. Hunger in America was already at unacceptably high levels before the pandemic. And in our newest report, Not Enough to Eat, we revealed troubling data that reflects the depths of the hunger crisis and the racial inequities that the pandemic has made all too clear. As you mentioned, Mr. Chairman, Black and Latinx households, women and children have been particularly hard hit during the pandemic. And in fact, more than 1 in 5 Black and Latinx families, adults with children, report that they sometimes or often don't have enough to eat. And as said earlier, as we were preparing those remarks, we learned of the positive provisions that were included in the continuing resolution, which we were very pleased to see. And we thank the chairman and the committee for their role in that effort. These will help, but we feel there's more work to be done. And I'll make a few more points about summer meals, EBT, community eligibility, the CACFP program, and WIC. When schools and childcare facilities closed last spring, 22 million children lost access to free reduced price meals, and millions more lost access in the childcare program supported by CACFP, the Child and Adult Care Food Program. For school children, what happened last spring is what happens at the start of every summer break, and we saw schools and community-based organizations turn to the summer nutrition programs to fill a gap. Even in normal summers, when there is time to plan, the summer nutrition programs reach only 1 in 6 children who need summer meals, resulting in higher food insecurity. Unfortunately, during COVID, these programs continue to have limited reach. The full range of child nutrition waivers that the USDA has issued have been critical to support program operations and meal service. And we're very thankful that the USDA's authority to issue nationwide waivers has been extended through FY 2021. We and nearly 1,400 organizations that signed our recent letter to USDA, we call upon the agency to extend child nutrition waivers that will expire on December 31st. In the pandemic EBT program, which was mentioned before, it has been a lifeline for families who have lost access to school meals. What happens is families get an EBT card to purchase food that replaces the food that they would have lost. And in every state and the District of Columbia have implemented this program. Pandemic EBT success in reducing food insecurity really underscores the need to extend it through 2021. And we're delighted that the recently added provisions in the continuing resolution make this possible. Pandemic EBT success reaffirms the need to expand summer EBT program, which operates a lot like pandemic EBT, but over the summer break. And now with the fall upon us, some children are returning to school and some parents are being able to go back to work. And for millions of children, school meals are critical for better educational and health outcomes. Community eligibility revolutionized school meals. Nearly 31,000 high-need schools offered breakfast and lunch at no charge at all to students in the 2019 to 2020 school year. Community eligibility also reduces administrative work for schools, increases school participation in meals, and eliminates school meal debt. The committee should take steps to increase the number of schools that are able to implement community eligibility and should consider making meals available at no charge to all schools. We provide textbooks and transportation to school children. Nutritious meals really are just as important to their success. And as parents return to work, it's vital for them and the economy to maximize CACFP for daycare in 2 ways. First, by providing emergency payments to providers to help cover operating deficits incurred during COVID shutdowns. And second, allowing providers to serve an additional meal or snack for children who are in daycare. And then finally, WIC is an essential program for supporting good health for mothers and their children. Yet too many eligible families face barriers to WIC. The committee's WIC waiver provisions in the Families First Act have been successful in helping struggling families get the much needed access that they need. And we've heard that allowing participants to complete appointments and do some of this over telehealth or over phone has been a real game changer. This keeps moms and their children safe. The flexibility should be made permanent and would strengthen WIC, and what things would strengthen WIC would also be increasing the fruit and vegetable benefit by $35. So, Mr. Chairman, we believe that all these programs are important, they're playing a role, but more needs to be done. And I thank the committee for their time, and I look forward to answering your questions.
Good. Well, thank you very much. Ms. Ritchie.
Chairman Scott, committee members, I am honored to address you today and thank you for your efforts to support child nutrition programs during this pandemic. My name is Angela Ritchie, as Representative Omar said, and I am the Nutrition Services Director at Roseville Area and St. Anthony New Brighton Schools in Minnesota, serving nearly 10,000 meals in 18 schools. I am a registered dietitian, and a member of the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics, as well as the School Nutrition Association. My school nutrition programs provide healthy meals that fuel students' success, combat childhood hunger, and boost local economy by employing community members and supporting local farmers. Unfortunately, our programs have faced critical challenges due to COVID-19, substantial declines in the number of meals served, and crippling revenue losses that threaten our ability to meet students' nutritional needs in the future. You should know how important the child nutrition waivers have been to our programs, and we are thankful to see that they are included in the continuing resolution. We're hopeful that the Senate will include these essential provisions to support this nutrition safety net for our children. On Friday, March 16th, our world changed. In just 2 days, my school nutrition team reinvented our service model. We packed up meals and served students through drive-through pickup sites, bus stops, and home deliveries. I was so impressed by my staff's positive attitudes, creative critical thinking, and commitment to ensure that none of our kiddos went hungry. For the first time, they have been recognized as the essential workers that they are. During the pandemic, my staff has had to face tremendous hurdles from evolving workplace safety procedures to supply chain disruptions and uncertainty around waiver extensions. In St. Anthony New Brighton, where 22% of students are eligible for free and reduced price meals, our program suddenly lost all a la carte revenue and participation from paid students. Despite a tripling of that county's unemployment rate, we struggled to combat the stigma associated with school meals. Pre-COVID, we served 850 meals per day, and now we're likely to serve 200. Given the loss of revenue, I had to furlough 40% of my staff. In Roseville, 48% of my students are eligible for free or reduced price meals. Typically, I serve over 5,200 lunches per day, but during the pandemic, my participation rate dropped to less than 3,200. A major challenge to participation is the language barriers that we face, as 33% of Roseville students speak languages other than English at home. Through targeted outreach, we are working to inform families about site pickups and home delivery of meals, but we are especially concerned given the reported increases in child food insecurity among these particular communities. COVID-19 has made serving school meals extraordinarily difficult. My team is preparing and distributing meal boxes for pickup and delivery to full-time distance learners, serving students attending school on a hybrid schedule, and offering meals to those students to eat at home for the remote learning days. Despite our attempts, we're still seeing lower than average participation. The participation drop and associated drop in revenue has impacted our budget and how we can serve students in the future. During school closures, my district kept our staff whole through the end of the school year, but we lost about $350,000, my entire fund balance. I had to cut summer staff hours, and despite furloughs this fall, we still anticipate a deficit due to low participation, increased food, supply, and labor costs. Our fund balance, which is critical for equipment purchases and salary adjustments, is gone. We plan to invest in culinary training and recipe development, and we hope to purchase real trays to eliminate single-use items. These plans are all on hold. Meanwhile, due to declining participation, we cannot honor purchasing commitments made to our local farmers who typically supply our locally grown produce and meats. If the waivers are extended quickly and we can boost meal participation, we may come in budget neutral by the end of the year. But if waivers expire, we anticipate permanent layoffs, fewer meal pickups, and even fewer students receiving healthy meals. The waivers are critical to ensuring we can serve our students in any setting. Operating the summer food service program with the area eligibility waiver helps speed up meal service, thereby reducing the risk of COVID exposure, all while ensuring students have access to meals without stigma. With so many challenges facing our team this year, it would be impossible to enroll all eligible families in the free and reduced price meal program. School nutrition programs are critical to achievement and lifelong healthy eating habits, but given this financial crisis, these programs will be forced to lay off employees and limit student services. To ensure students are nourished, we need all waivers immediately extended through the end of the school year. We need the flexibility, we need the ability to plan for spring so we don't have the turnaround that we did this fall. And most importantly, the assurance that in the midst of this national emergency, we can feed all hungry students. In addition, we require emergency relief funds to mitigate devastating losses from pandemic disruptions. Congress has helped numerous other industries. What is more important than to invest in the health of our country's children? Thank you again, Chairman Scott, and all the committee members.
Well, thank you very much. We'll begin the questions with Ms. Omar. She had the first question, and then Ms. Davis, Bonamici, and Levin. Ms. Omar.
Well, first of all, I'd like to thank you, Mr. Chairman, for hosting this very important briefing and all of the panelists for joining us today. I would also like to again welcome Miss Angela Ritchie, who's joining us from Minneapolis, and recognize her dedication to serving the students and schools in our community. As a former nutrition educator myself, I know firsthand the importance of child nutrition programs in combating food insecurity, and I'm keenly aware of the lasting impact on our children. Ms. Ritchie, could you please share the impact child hunger has on your students' academic progress, social, emotional health?
Sure. So as a dietitian and with a degree in public health, I'm well aware that food insecurity leads to an increased risk of delayed development in young children, an increased risk of chronic disease like asthma and anemia, and behavioral problems like hyperactivity, anxiety, aggression. You can't learn on an empty belly. I've seen kiddos who come to school extra hungry on Mondays. I've seen kids who try to take extra food or take food from the share table and put it in their backpacks. Those kids aren't focused on math. Those kids aren't having their basic needs met. So we know how important it is to make sure that we're not seeing them in our schools right now. They don't have access to our share tables right now. And so these child nutrition safety nets are so incredibly critical to not only their ability to learn, but their social and emotional health and well-being during this pandemic.
Do I have time to ask one more question, Chairman?
Yes, please do.
According to the U.S. Census Household Pulse Survey, as many as 17 million children went hungry this summer. 21% of Black and Latino participants revealed that their households did not have enough food to eat during the week of July 21st, compared to 8% of white participants. Ms. Ritchie, how was the COVID-19 pandemic exacerbated existing racial disparities in food insecurity?
Sure. So, the skyrocketing unemployment rates and the COVID pandemic rates, we know which families they were disproportionately affecting. And so we wanted to make sure that these families in particular were able to make ends meet and provide healthful meals to their children. So it's obviously disproportionately affecting our communities of color, so we need to have particular outreach to those areas. So working with our cultural liaisons, working through social media pages, and doing targeted outreach, and making sure that these families have access to programs. We are a 42% Caucasian district, and among the other 58%, we have so many different backgrounds and languages spoken that it is definitely a challenge to do targeted outreach. So when we're making decisions and we're doing outreach, our district motto is quality teaching and education, equity in all that we do. Equity is not a buzzword here. Equity is the lens through which we make all decisions. So we are making sure that we have those families in mind when we're doing the meal service models. So for example, we had pickup sites. That was how we started to make sure that we got food out fast, starting March 18th. We had to revisit that and say, what families have access to vehicles? What families can make it to these sites? How do we target our bus stops? We ended up having 21 bus stops that we made sure were in communities that we knew didn't have transportation otherwise, and we knew had limited financial means. So by pulling from our free and reduced meal rate forms, we were able to make sure that we had a bus stop in the neighborhoods of need and that those kids had access to our meals.
Thank you. I've seen how food insecurity impacts communities of color, which is why I work so tirelessly to ensure every child has access to nutrition meal. I want to thank you for expressing upon us to continue to do this work on behalf of our children. And I again want to thank the committee for giving me the opportunity to include my Meals Act in the CARES Act that passed in March, and for continuing to work very hard in extending the waivers. Again, thank you, and thank you, Chairman, and to all the committee members.
Thank you. Ms. Davis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to Mr. Guardia and Ms. Ritchie for joining us today. Greatly appreciate it. You know, this morning when I got up, I thought about our hearing, and I also thought about the work that was done last night and how important it was to pass the CR with this waiver that extends through the fiscal year of 2021. And if that hadn't happened, I really worry throughout our country of the men and women who've been working so hard to be sure that our children are getting fed through this period. And I wonder, Mr. Guardia, as you think about this and the desire, I think, to see this PEBT model implemented nationwide for a summer EBT program, what should we be looking at? How can we try to bring this about and really building on what we've just learned?
Yeah, well, we've learned a lot through the pandemic EBT program, and I think it creates a possibility to have a lot of those learnings translate and expand the summer EBT model. We eventually, as I mentioned, we eventually got all states and the District of Columbia to get it set up. It has a tremendous amount of benefits that give people really the flexibility that they need. I think among the things that it's just an incredibly efficient resource. I mean, much like SNAP, which is handled elsewhere that members probably know about. It not only provides flexibility for families, but it also can provide some economic benefit to local community as well. We really see this, the pandemic EBT program, because it was so successful in reaching people who weren't able to access school meals. We really see this as a potential to have people highlight and put a little bit more emphasis behind the summer EBT program, which really was was kind of seen sort of as an in-between phase for the school meal programs before, but it has been something that we've been very pleased on. Pandemic EBT, and incredibly effective. Pandemic EBT has lifted between 2 to 3 million children out of hunger so far from what we've seen, and so I think that goes a long way to also bolstering the case to expand summer EBT.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And Ms. Ritchie, there have been certainly some criticism that it doesn't that the summer EBT program wasn't reaching as many students. We know that for many families, it was difficult for them to be able to get to the school or to get to the resource to pick up those meals. Are there some innovations that have been brought about through the pandemic EBT that we should learn from?
PEBT is sort of runs parallel to our program and helps, of course, our families. I can't speak to that. We did definitely help notify families through our social media platforms and other means of family communications within our districts.
Part of my question is, should we restrict meals just to sort of making certain that a family is eligible when it comes to the summer?
Restrict in terms of PEBT versus school nutrition?
What children were able to access during the summertime, the way some of the schools were restricted. Yeah.
I see. I think we need to put the onus on families to use the need that they require for their family situation. And I think the format that the food is coming to them is very different from whether they utilize child nutrition programs versus PEBT. For example, our families are getting boxes, one box for the freezer and one box for the cooler. The freezer box contains all breakfast and lunch entrees, and this is something that a kid can pop in the microwave and serve themselves.
Yeah.
This is cooking something that you would purchase from the supermarket.
That's helpful. Thank you. Appreciate it. My time is up.
Thank you. Ms. Bonamici.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and for organizing the briefing, and thank you to Mr. Guardia and Ms. Ritchie. This is such an important issue. We know, as has been mentioned, that the pandemic has really exacerbated inequities and highlighted a need that already existed in our community. And I share that, I guess, satisfaction that the continuing resolution that we passed last night extends and expands the pandemic EBP program and extends the waiver authority. Frankly, I think we need to do more, and I hope we can. Earlier this year, it seems like it was a long time ago, but when we passed the Families First Coronavirus Response Act, that included my bipartisan bill to protect access to meals during COVID closures by providing that critical flexibility at the beginning of the pandemic. Allows the schools to continue to serve through the programs, the National School Lunch Program, the breakfast program. Mr. Guardia, can you expand a little bit on what it would have been like for families if we had not enacted these flexibilities? Why are these provisions critical to keep in place? And if you have reviewed it, do you have an opinion on the Pandemic Child Hunger Prevention Act?
Thank you. Yeah. So I mean, it's a little troubling to think, had we not had these provisions in place, how bad it would have been. As I mentioned, we've issued this report, Not Enough to Eat, and I'll just to kind of answer the first part of your question. I think it provides the right context. We've been tracking regular food insecurity, and one of the things that we wanted to sort of drill down on was the depths of which this has happened. When we talk about food insecurity, we talk a lot about people's concern and the potential for not being able to get the food. We said these numbers are quite high. Let's figure out what's really happening. And what I mentioned before, when I mentioned that 1 in 5 Black and Latinx household, and I think the number for the general population was probably close to 1 in 10, so double. But still, these are numbers of people where they've actually changed their meal, their feeding patterns. They've actually changed. They've actually kind of foregone food because they simply didn't have enough to eat. And linking it back to some of the other things that we talked about sort of with the pandemic EBT program, we've gotten great feedback from families that have said, this has been a game changer. People have had to make decisions between paying bills and paying food, paying for food or feeding their kids, and pandemic EBT has been something that people have been incredibly grateful for. So it is, I would say, had that initial bill not passed, this is, it is scary to think what would happen. And on the Child Hunger Prevention Act, we support it, and we think certainly as part of it. There's been some conversation, I alluded to it a little bit in my comments about the need for universal meals. We think that's an important move as well. And we think that certainly ways to expand community eligibility can be a pathway to that, because we understand some of the dynamics in play there. But absolutely, getting kids access to all meals, it's more efficient. It ends things like school debt shaming and some of the stigma attached to that.
I don't want to cut you off, but I only have a minute and I want to get a question into Ms. Ritchie. Thank you so much. Ms. Ritchie, I'm going to follow up on my colleague Ms. Davis's question about innovation in getting meals out. I visited sites at schools, outdoor sites where people could drive up and pick up food. But I've also spoken with some districts that are using their school buses to get out into the community to deliver meals. Can you think of other ways ways that we can make sure that our students are getting nutrition? And how can we share the best practices and really get the ideas out there to other school districts?
I apologize for the audio. Can you hear me all right on this?
Yes.
Okay, great.
Definitely.
So yes, we've been using a number of service models. We've been using bus routes. We've been using drive-through pickups. We've been doing home deliveries for people who can't make it to either. I think it looks very different depending on where you are in your community, whether you're in a rural area where the houses are very spread out, or where you're in a more urban setting as our districts are. I think that the School Nutrition Association is doing a great job at helping to connect sort of that best practices, resource tools, and then within state, like the Minnesota School Nutrition Association, we've done a good job at reaching out to other school nutrition directors and being able to talk through, what is your school district doing? What does it look like for your kids? Are they back in distance, hybrid, or fully back on site? And that really determines the route of delivery.
Terrific. I see my time has expired. I yield back. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Guardia and Ms. Ritchie.
Thank you. We have Levin, Adams, and Schreier. Andy Levin.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. 5 minutes. This is so important. I'm not sure how I'm going to get my questions in, but first I have to give a shout out to some of the things that are being discussed here. On August 25th, I went to the Robert Lutz School in Clinton Township, Michigan, with the Macomb Intermediate School District, where Gleaners was helping with the summer food service program. Innovative model, groceries for families in the parking lot. They drove through, they checked them off if they have kids, eligible, but then Gleaners was providing food anyway. And it was a beautiful, holistic program. So we just need more of that flexibility. But I want to talk about something a little different, the special supplemental nutrition program in WIC, which provides food assistance and nutrition education to low-income pregnant, breastfeeding, and non-breastfeeding postpartum women, and to infants and kids up to 5 years old. The program's been a lifeline for many families across the country, especially single moms and low-income households. The need for WIC benefits has only increased during this time of economic uncertainty. That's why House Democrats allocated $1.1 billion for WIC in the HEROES Act to meet increased caseloads and triple the value of WIC cash value vouchers, or CVVs, through the end of fiscal year 2020. But what I want to talk about is the barrier that families have faced during this pandemic, namely the lack of safe alternatives to the traditional in-store shopping in the WIC program, like online purchasing and curbside pickup, and what's available to the general public, and why it wouldn't be available to these folks who need it most. I just don't get it. I spoke to moms in my district who just say getting to the grocery store is really hard in a pandemic, in terms of your safety, your kids' safety, and so forth. In May, I asked USDA to extend waivers to WIC so that they could work with states and food providers to implement online, curbside, or delivery options for these families. And I got an unsatisfactory response from USDA. So I introduced my bipartisan bill, HR 7933, the COVID-19 WIC Safety and Modernization Act, with Congresswoman Stefanik. This bill would establish a task force to recommend updates to WIC that promotes convenience, safety, and equitable access to the program. This is something that's sorely needed for a program that's often overlooked altogether. So, Mr. Guardia, could you speak to the challenges facing the WIC program generally during COVID, and especially the challenges families face with program flexibility? Like, how can they get their groceries if everybody else has all these services and they can't get access to them?
Thank you for the question. Yes, we're very supportive of the WIC Safety and Modernization Act. Certainly, we have seen, when some of the changes that have gone into play for WIC to allow people to just do simple stuff like get their appointments remotely. That, as I mentioned in my opening remarks, was a game changer for people. They were able to keep their children safe. Moms were able to stay safe. But as you mentioned, there's still a lot of room to be done. We do need to see WIC kind of come up to a little bit more of what people are. It's not even just sort of what's kind of new and modern. It's kind of almost the standard now. People, people kind of go through these processes of online ordering. Yes, it is safer. Yes, it is more convenient. But it's just kind of how commerce is done. We've seen the SNAP program make some advances to that, and we really think it's important to have our friends at USDA kind of push some of these advances forward for WIC as well.
Well, thank you. And, Mr. Chairman, I just think that as we work to modernize and scale up all these different nutrition programs to meet this very difficult moment, I just ask that we not forget about the families who rely on WIC. And with that, I yield back with my thanks.
Thank you. Ms. Adams and then Ms. Schreier. Ms. Adams.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for hosting the briefing, and to our speakers, thank you as well. Last night's continuing resolution included many urgently needed child nutrition assistance provisions, but another issue that I'm incredibly concerned about that wasn't included is support for school meal programs. In May, almost 70% of program directors anticipated a financial loss for the 2019-2020 school year, with some districts estimating losses up to 2.3 million. I introduced a bill to address this issue by providing local food authorities emergency reimbursements, which was included in the HEROES Act, the Feed the Children Act. So Ms. Ritchie, why is this funding so critical, and what are the potential consequences if these programs do not receive additional funding?
Sure. So as you alluded to, I'm not alone in my loss of revenue. And in a recent SNA poll, up to 80% of school districts saw fewer meals served, and 60% of those had seen a drop in participation of 50% or more. So I actually feel fortunate that I have participation where it's at. But if we do not see funding, we're going to see permanent staff loss. We're going to see furloughs turn into firings. And that hinders our ability to pivot as we see school models change. So for example, our board decided last night that we were going to scale back into a hybrid. So we started distance and we're going to scale back to hybrid. I have the ability to pull back furloughed staff, hopefully, if they're willing to come back. If we had to terminate folks, we would not remain agile to be able to serve students as we quickly roll back to a hybrid model, and then from there scale up to having students back in our buildings. We anticipate participation will increase once students are back in our buildings, but we really need that funding for the increased labor model now and in the future as we scale back in. In addition, we've seen supply costs and food costs go through the roof. We've seen glove costs go 60% higher almost overnight, and they're climbing from there. In addition, we're purchasing foods that are pre-made and some that are pre-packaged to be able to put into meal boxes, and those have a higher price tag. Beyond that, we have the supplies that we need to package the food to get them into homes. So that could be bags, microwavable containers. Heck, even the boxes that we put food in cost 44 cents a piece. And with 2 kids getting, or 2 boxes per kid, that's 88 cents just in boxes. And I know that 88 cents doesn't sound like a lot, but when you add it up, for my district alone, it really, the total is staggering just to get meals to kids where they're at. So without those funds, we would not have the flexibility to change models. We would not have the flexibility to continue our operations that are operating at a higher cost right now due to the supply, the labor, and the food. And in terms of going forward, I mean, we had an oven breakdown at the end of August, so at the end of our real summer. And without a fund balance, I don't know how I'm going to replace that. And we are doing very limited cooking on site. We have a lot of special education students back in our buildings, receiving the special services that they need. And we still have to cook on site. We still have to melt cheese and brown off potatoes. So I am looking at a zero fund balance, and I need to replace a $40,000 piece of equipment. So I'm in a real bind, and I know that I'm not the only one.
Yeah. Oh, wow. Thank you for addressing that. Mr. Guardia, 99% of SNAP benefits are spent at food retailers within 30 days, making the program a fast-acting economic stimulus. And since the pandemic, EBT benefits are issued through the same system as SNAP benefits. Do you anticipate that the pandemic EBT has a simulatory effect on the economy?
Yes, Ms. Adams, and thanks for that comment. We don't have specific data yet on the degree, but we believe it's pretty similar to what you see in SNAP. So we have here the potential for a sort of a virtuous cycle of feeding people, increasing the economy. And as you mentioned, the money turns over very quickly, and the money turns over very locally. And that's what struggling economies throughout our country need right now.
Okay. Am I out of time, Mr. Chair? Oh, I think so. All right. Thank you very much. I yield back.
Thank you. And Dr. Schreier.
Thank you. Thank you to both of our guests today. Ms. Adams, thank you for your question about SNAP. I believe that one of the simplest things that we could do would just be to expand SNAP benefits. It helps the economy, it helps families. It's very straightforward. But I'm in the Ag Committee and we get a ton of resistance there. I wanted to talk about, because we've been talking today so much about food during the pandemic, but I had a question for you, Mr. Guardia, because you've mentioned a couple times just having school meals for all children. It's something that I asked about long before the pandemic. Knowing what goes into home packed lunches a lot of the time, knowing that good quality food, fruits and vegetables changes kids' palates, so they choose those foods later, knowing the relationship between behavior and academic outcomes and good nutrition. And I was just wondering, in the past, have any bills been put forward about this? What kind of resistance do you get? What would be the costs? We do provide transportation for all children, so providing one meal does not seem unreasonable or out of the realm of reality. And I was just wondering how those economics play out and how strong the resistance is.
Yeah, thank you for the question, Dr. Schreier. And it's great to see you. You were actually one of the very first people I met on the job at the anti-hunger conference. So that was right at the beginning of all this change to what we've seen. But to your question, yeah, we do see some concerns about going to a universal meal plan, but there are so many things that we also need to keep in mind. There are tremendous cost efficiencies we would expect see come out of a universal plan. There is a lot of effort, and we hear about this as well from people around the country, where people have to deal with things like collecting school debt and the stigma that goes attached with that, and as well as going through the processes to get kids and schools certified, whether it be certain children or whether it's schools or the region certified for the various aspects. We do have, as I was mentioning, steps in place where we can have a pathway towards that, where we can look at some of the community eligibility formula and adjust that, where we can also look at ways where we can, instead of having sort of the having a low cost meal program, increase that as well, or not have it be sort of a shared cost, just have it be more expanded free meals for people who do fall within the current within the current categories. And you know, we would tip our hat to Representative Omar's bill, which we worked on as well with what has that. We also believe that, as you mentioned, that there will be certain better health outcomes that we would see. It would have probably reduce hunger and obesity by having structured meal programs that we support. So this is a tremendously great opportunity for us to examine this going forward. But yes, we would be very supportive of it. Thank you.
Thank you. And if I could run one other question by you, again, I try to look for simple solutions, and we're talking about schools having meals, distributing food. We have a pandemic EBT for the summers. I just was wondering whether a more robust pandemic EBT, like the one we're talking about now, could simply replace the need for meals provided by schools and just streamline the process. And frankly, in the process, probably help our economy because those dollars are spent at supermarkets. I'm just throwing out the idea because it seems like the simplest solution. Sometimes those clean ones are the easiest to implement.
Yeah, so Mr. Chairman, should I continue?
Yeah, please do.
Okay. So yeah, we believe that that currently there is some benefit to both the end school meal program and the pandemic EBT. We see kind of them working concomitantly. We see them benefiting and helping fill in the gaps. It has a lot of the virtues that we talked about in terms of increasing the economy and giving families flexibility. But we also like to see the nutritional standards maintained, and those are important also within the regular school meal program and school breakfast and school lunch. It provides a lot of flexibility and a lot of opportunities for kids to get the nutrition they need.
Thank you. Are there other questions?
Chairman Scott, could I also
yes,
add
please.
something to that? I just want to not put in a plug for school meals, but I do want to talk a little bit about what summer food service typically looks like. We do see studies have shown that over the summer, children, especially those from food insecure households and those of specific backgrounds, have a tendency to weight gain over summer months. Within our summer meal programs, we have very strict nutritional guidelines, and we see that especially—
You have what kind of guidelines?
Nutritional guidelines. So we have to offer so many fruits, vegetables, lean proteins, low-fat dairy, et cetera. And this is one of those times where we don't necessarily have the return on investment, dollar per dollar, but we do want to hold that nutritional guideline to make sure that we're not hurting our students over the summer by saying, here's the funds that you have for your PBT, here's how you have to stretch them. And if you're fifth graders staying at home by themselves, you have to cook your own meal. And this is one of those areas where school nutrition can come in and say, families, we can help you with this. We can provide well-rounded meals that are ready to eat. And that's something that's off of your plate, especially during these times. Thank you for—
I think the follow-up question on that is, if you don't provide the nutritious meals in school, what is the likelihood that the children, if they're left on their own with just the money, not the meal, what is the likelihood that they'll get a nutritious meal with the money rather than potato chips and French fries?
That's a great question, because I think the tendency is to be, as we see in public health, the tendency is to go the easiest route. So how do we make nutritious meals the easiest route? I would say school nutrition is a great platform for that.
Okay.
Thank you. Great answers.
Thank you. Mr. Guardia, you mentioned on CEP, the administrative savings. Can you quantify how much is saved administratively by going to community eligibility rather than having to pick and choose who gets served and all of the other things, debt shaming and all of the other things you mentioned? How much more efficient is it, and does it really cost that much more to go to community eligibility?
Well, because of the acceptance of community eligibility currently, we're the jump from the degree to which we have community eligibility now to full kind of universal school meals is probably not a huge jump, because we do see a lot of kids, a lot of the schools making themselves, getting the community eligibility. But
what portion of the schools that are eligible for CEP actually take it up?
I'll have to get back to you, Mr. Chairman. I don't recall that number off the top of my head. Oh, I'm told it's 60% of the schools that are 60% of the schools that are eligible for community eligibility are taking advantage of it.
Okay.
Yeah.
And the cost of, does it cost the school much more to, I guess it depends on where they are on on the scale.
Yeah.
The lower percentage that are eligible for free meals, the more it'll cost them to take it up. Is that right?
Yeah. So yeah, and going back to your earlier question, we don't have the exact cost savings for the sort of those other things that I mentioned, but we do hear from our folks in the community that there is a fair amount of work that's done to comply and to deal with school debt. But the thing about it is, one of the things that we believe is these are all expenses that are currently being funded, right? And so these are all expenses that schools are bearing, and we would rather see more of that money go to nutrition rather than some of these overhead items that we think would be a more efficient use of the money.
Let me ask another question. Nationally, where do the food banks fit in solving the problem?
So food banks are a very important part of the response, and we heard a little bit about that earlier in the questions. But the fact is, the charitable sector alone can't do it. You know, we have some studies that were done with our friends at Feeding America Food Bank and network, and for every one meal that's provided through the Feeding America Food Bank network, the Federal Nutrition Program, specifically SNAP, which was mentioned earlier, provides 9. So when I kind of go back to the report that we released earlier, when we're talking about the depths and the kind of pain and the extent to which hunger is seeping its way into our national fabric at this moment. Yes, it's we support the food banks, they're doing great work, but to kind of deal with this scale of a problem, we really need the federal nutrition programs like SNAP and the child nutrition programs we've been talking about now. These are you know, we talk about scalable solutions, things that can really make an impact, and these are the things that can really make an impact.
Thank you. Are there other questions? Any other questions? If not, I want to thank Mr. Guardia and Ms. Ritchie for your testimony. This has been very helpful. We obviously have a problem, and we're actually coming up with some solutions. We have more work to do, but we're going to continue doing it. And I want to thank both of you for being with us today. Is there anything further? If not, thank everyone for participating, and thank our witnesses for your testimony, and that ends the briefing. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.